You know, this festival started 50 years ago to help fund the effort to stop the road. And really, there were a group of people, that a handful of them, and you'll hear about them in a minute, but one of them, a daughter of Fells Point, a girl of Highland Town, a person who is now a woman who not just leads our country, but leads the world. The longest woman who has served in the history of the United States Congress. Longest service. That's good. Yeah. I have to tell you, we rehearsed this. We set this up. The longest serving woman in the U.S. Congress. The first woman elected to the United States Senate in her own right, who was not somebody's wife or something else, but elected on her own, serving her 5th term in the U.S. Congress, the first woman to be the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. We could stand here all night and just talk about all the first. But the most important first is she is the first woman of Fells Point. Senator Barbara Mikulski.
Jim, I want to, first of all, thank you for your own service to the Baltimore City Council. You've been an outstanding member of the City Council. You've been an advocate for our community. Our community's been a better place because of the time and dedication you put in it. I met Jim when he lived in Columbia, Maryland, and usually we have the reverse, where people move out to the suburbs, but Jim moved into Baltimore, and not only moved in, he went all in for Baltimore. And Jim, we want to thank you. Thank you for all of that. And I'd like to thank Delegate Brooke Lierman for inviting me to this, along with the Fells Point Festival, the Fells Point Main Street community. 50 years. 50 years. 1966, the very first festival. You know, and it was just a new way of thinking about how to organize to raise money for a lawsuit to be able to fight to save our homes and our neighborhood, and at the same time to show off the neighborhood, because the power that be wanted to bulldoze it because we were viewed as the other side of the tracks. We were redlined and sidelined by the downtown banks. It was very hard to get loans to buy anything here. And through the creativity of people who want to protest, and protest nonviolently, the people organized, particularly through the Fells Point Historic Society and Preservation, organized a festival. And it was fabulous, just absolutely fabulous. But not only was the festival fabulous, it was to show off our community and the grit and the determination, the verve and the resilience of it. I was pleased to be part of all this and to be part of the effort. It was not about being against the highway. It was about being for the neighborhood. For the neighborhood and for the people that lived in that neighborhood. As Councilman Kraft has indicated, and PJ, our beloved PJ, I missed that store and coming in, those little postcards and so on. And to realize that Fells Point was really a village. And what did we mean by it? People lived in the community, they worked in the community, they worshiped in the community, and it was our place to be. And that's what we wanted to say. What they, the downtown people, particularly the Greater Baltimore Committee in those days, followed a school of thought called Robert Moses. And if you read the history of urban planning, you'll read about Robert Moses. He believed not build it and they will come, but tear it down and it will stay. Well, what the hell is that? So I belonged to a school of thought promulgated by a woman actually originally from Canada, but lived in the United States. Her name was Jane Jacobs. And she wrote a fabulous book called The Life and Death of Great American Cities. And she described what made a city great. She really was talking about Greenwich Village in New York. And I said, that's our neighborhood. That's our community. And what I knew was about the road fight that was going on and what was going on. And the whole idea, and where cities followed Robert Moses, now, 50 and 60 years later, they're tearing them down because what did they do? They built moats around cities, they built moats around neighborhoods, and they drove people out. When the States Roads Commission wanted to take homes, starting up around St. Casimir's and then coming down, and remember, where Jimmy's is down to the waterfront would have been the highway. Federal Hill was viewed as an engineering obstacle. Where the whole Baltimore Gold Coast is, all the economic development and so on that went on, that ultimately gave Baltimore a new skyline, but a new semblance of self-confidence, was in the path of that road. Had not a band of people fought it in all neighborhoods, black and white, we would not have the city we had today, because it was tear it down and build these massive things. But what was happening was, they not only wanted to take your home, but they didn't even want to give you appraised value. They didn't want to give the people relocation benefits. If you were a business, like my grandmother owned a bakery on Eastern Avenue, the famous Mikulski bakery, you weren't going to get anything that valued the nature of your business. So when the fight was organized, and it originally was done by people who were the Preservationist Society, then others took it up, like myself. They were the first. Things began to happen. For me, I was told about this by some young people who were working in the community. They were at the University of Maryland School of Social Work, and they said, people are afraid to fight. They're afraid to take on City Hall. They're afraid of the bosses. They're afraid of the political machine. They were told they'll lose their job, but they're going to get into the fight. They're trying to choose between losing their home or losing their job. And I said, well, you can fight this. There are ways that you can fight this. I heard about the lawsuit, the Preservation Society. So we had a meeting at St. Stanislaus Church, and I said, we can fight this. If Bertha's ready to flex her muscles, I'm ready to get into this. And I said, but what we need to do, because there were only less than 15 people at that first meeting, we have to show that we can create the illusion of power. And the first thing we need to do is to give ourselves a militant name. And that's when we went down to Galificis on the corner of, Thames and Ann Street. I ultimately lived on Ann Street. And after a couple of shooters of Ouzo, long before Ouzo had a bay, we gave ourselves a militant name. It was called SCAR, Southeast Council Against the Road. And we formed a citywide coalition called MAD, Movement Against Destruction. And our prime force for our legal advice and our legal team came from what was being led by the Fells Point Historical and Preservation Society. We literally didn't know what this future would be because, as I said, this was before the dawn of the digital age. All of our signs and all of our protests had to be silkscreen or hand-painted. Any messages we sent out were by telephone, because that's what we had. But because of the determination, we were willing to do it. And to this day, when one thinks about whether it's SCAR, whether we think about the Preservation Society, whether we think about the African American community in Sharp Street, Leadenhall, or along the Route 40 corridor, we were all in it together, and we all leaned in. Baltimore during that time was a segregated town. Baltimore was a segregated town. And there were African Americans who could not come into the taverns and to the bars. We met in churches and we met in public buildings because that's the way we could all get together. And I know the Mikulski family's here. Where are they? Well, much is said about your grandmother and your great-grandmother, but I'll tell you a story about your grandfather, Frank. So people said, why are you forming coalitions with them? The them meant the West Side people, the African American community of Sharp Street and Leadenhall. Remember, this was 66, this was 68. Tensions ran high. They ran high even in this city. But the people on West Side were protesting the highway there. So we went over to a church, rode on buses that we organized that's in front of St. Stanislaus. Frank Mikulski came with us. His beloved wife was there, other members of St. Stan's, the SCAR community, Historical and Preservation Society, all of the groups. And during that testimony, African Americans testified about their home. Then your grandfather, or your great-grandfather, took the microphone. And I'm going to get Misty telling you this story. So here was Frank, who wasn't much of a talker. His wife did a lot of the talking at the community meetings. And he said, "My name is Frank Mikulski. And I'm a working man, and I work very hard for my home. We've lived in our neighborhood for a number of years. And over here, I see guys from the black community. And I want them to know we fought side by side in World War II. And now I wonder, what the hell did we fight for? We fought to save a government that's now turning on us. And I want to say to those men here, the men particularly of World War II, who wore the uniform, the men who went in uniform, that if it was good enough for you to be at Guadalcanal, and it was good enough for you to be at Normandy, and you're right here tonight, I want somebody else who stood there and carried the flag with you then. I'll carry you with the flag today. That was the first black and white meeting in Baltimore where people came together for something other than civil rights, because we were coming together for that. And I will tell you, Frank Mikulski's eloquent voice of a working man from the community rallied everybody to be their higher and best self. Well, you know the rest of the story, and we went on to it. I had my good times in fighting, and I will always cherish the Fells Point Festival. So after the first couple ones, we set up a place right now, what used to be called Big Boy Subs. I think it's down where the Brass Works is now. And we set up something called Radio Free Fells Point. And it was, if you came, we had a drawing of where the epicenter of the highway would be, it would be torn down 3 blocks away where it would be, and 4 to 6 blocks, and so. And we had microphones, so we were like broadcasting for freedom in our community. So Channel 13 showed up, and they said, "Barbara, why don't you talk?" Well, not being dainty, but nevertheless a little fearless, I jumped up on a table and I said this: the British couldn't take Fells Point, the termites couldn't take it, and by God, the State's Roads Commission can't. So I ended up with legal news, got off of that and walked back to the festival. Somebody slapped me on the back and said, "Damn it, Barbara, you ought to run for city council." I said, "Good idea." But I want to thank the people of Fells Point and all of those who built the coalition that made this possible. There's not a me, there's a whole lot of we. And there's a whole lot of we called We the People. I have brought people down to this community, even people from around the world. I brought presidents here, I had Al Gore here, and so on. But what I say to the people who come from around the world, particularly women, I said, you know, God bless America and our Constitution. In other countries, when you're a protester, they throw you in jail. But because under our Constitution and the First Amendment, the right to organize, the right to speak your mind, the right to print your own papers if you want to, instead of throwing me in jail, I had the chance to run for the Baltimore City Council and to be able to run for Congress and in its own way to serve the people. I'm grateful for what the people of our community have done to help me. But I want you to know, when I look here at what has happened, the grit, the determination, where for the last really several hundred years, Fells Point continues to reinvent itself. Fells Point has a fantastic history. It has current and vibrant activity now, but Fells Point has a great future. So Fells Point today, Fells Point tomorrow, Fells Point forever, and God bless America, where we have a chance to speak our mind, fight for our home, enjoy the kind of coalitions that we build communities instead of building highways. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to now introduce representing the 46th Legislative District, delegation, Delegate Brooke Lierman.
Thank you. Well, I'm very honored to be speaking here at the same podium as one of my heroes, Senator Barbara Mikulski. And tonight I bring very brief messages, but heartfelt messages of gratitude and congratulations. Gratitude first, though, always. I am so grateful to Senator Mikulski, to your great-grandfather, to PJ, to everybody here who for so long has worked so hard to make Fells Point such an amazing neighborhood, who led the charge in making sure that it had the chance to become the thriving community, to stay a thriving community, and to have many futures as a thriving community. I live just across the square with my husband and son. On our block, there are 8 children under the age of 4. And it is wonderful to see so many kids at Thames Street Park and a vibrant new school. St. Stan's has a new life now as a new wonderful school where children from all over the city come. And it's hard to imagine what this city would be like if that road would have been built. The 46th district would have had a lot more cars and a lot fewer people. So I am so grateful for all the work that all of you did back then and have continued to do for so many years. Thank you. I also have congratulations from both the 46th district delegation. So we have an official certificate here congratulating the Fells Point Fun Festival in recognition of their 50th anniversary. And let it not be said that the 46th delegation and Governor Larry Hogan can never agree on anything, because he also, I'm here to present a certificate from Governor Larry Hogan, also congratulating the Fells Point Fun Festival on their 50th anniversary. So this is a bipartisan message of congratulations. We can all agree that we are very happy that Fells Point is here to stay and has a very bright future ahead of it. Thank you.
Hello again, guys. We have Allie Smith here from the Mayor's Office, who has presented us with a certificate of recognition from the City of Baltimore. On behalf of the citizens of Baltimore, the Mayor is pleased to present this certificate to the Preservation Society in recognition of the 50th Annual Fells Point Fun Festival, commemorating the Preservation Society's founding in 1967 to stop the proposed extension of I-95 across the Inner Harbor. Your spirited campaign to have Fells Point and Federal Hill listed on the National Register of Historic Places prevailed, averting extensive demolition of these Baltimore treasures. Thank you for your dedication to the preservation of our city, our great city's 2 oldest maritime communities. Presented this 30th day of September 2016, signed Mayor Stephanie Rawlings-Blake.
Sitting senator can make it, but the mayor can't.
I'd like to take a couple of minutes to ask if there is anyone here in the room from the road fight that would like to say a few words.
Well, Mr. Cole, though, we need to hear from Bill Cole first.
We don't have to.
Yes, we must.
We know you. We have to.
Thank you all for the opportunity to be here. Bill Cole, President and CEO of the Baltimore Development Corporation, recovering member of the Baltimore City Council, and the Senator and I were stopping by today just to let Councilman Kraft know that there is life after the Baltimore City Council. Senator, I don't think you know this, but I live in Otterbein. Grew up in Federal Hill, live in Otterbein in a house that would not be there were it not for your efforts and the efforts of many here to stop that road. Otterbein would not exist at all. That neighborhood that sits right between the stadiums, Sharp Leadenhall and Otterbein, wouldn't be here. So I think of you often as I pull up with my family and recognize the efforts that you've made, not only for this city, but for this state and country. The reality is, Senator Mikulski has established a new bar for service, not just public service, but constituent service. At the City Council, she was...
said a new bar.
It's called Uso Bay, right? The reality is, the effort she made as a city council person, everybody who has followed her on that body has tried to achieve the high level of constituent service that she established there. And that has continued on into Congress. I know I worked for Congressman Cummings for 7 years, and we always tried to keep up with Senator Mikulski's level of constituent service. So, Senator, thank you very much for being our champion. You will forever be our champion. I think Councilman Kraft retired because he knew in Senator Mikulski's retirement she'd be calling that council office a lot. So, to the merchants, I just want to say it's been a heck of a year. We know that. It's been painful and challenging. There is a lot of good things on the horizon, but you have gone through a painful period with parking and construction. And I look out the window at that amazing project, the rec pier, that I don't think anybody thought would ever happen. It's happening. And I recognize this short-term pain, what I believe will be long-term gain in Fells Point. So thank you for your tolerance and understanding and recognition that Fells Point has been through trouble before, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. We will celebrate together when that's open. We will celebrate this weekend for another outstanding Fells Point Festival. I remember almost all of them that I attended. There were some college years that I may not remember. But this is a celebration of this outstanding community that comes together, merchants and residents, and is very unique in the way you rally together to fight for your neighborhood. So thank you all very much, Senator. It is a privilege and honor to speak after you, and thankfully not before you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Where's your book? You're not gonna. I don't have it. God.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. I also want to reach out and ask if there is anyone here from the road fight that would like to share a few words.
Tony? Laura? Well, we actually came in at the end of the road fight, and our tie with Barbara, she told some of the story, but the actual bulldozers were actually imminent several times in this whole effort to defeat the road. The Preservation Society were in process of surveying all of the property deeds so that they could present to the federal government the worthiness of maintaining and preserving these structures down here. But all of the properties in the demolition line in Fells Point had been taken by the state, except for 3. And Barbara had her staff research and found the owner of the house on Ann Street that Tony and I now have restored and lived in. And Barbara established an office there. It was a mess. It had been slum housing, and the house was absolutely a mess. I think, Barbara, if I can tell stories on you, your mother was appalled. Because Barbara took her mother there, and she said, Barbara, what are you doing down here? Barbara established an office there with a telephone number, so it was legitimately her property. And you can imagine, Barbara, if the bulldozers had come down, and they threatened twice in that, so she was going to stand there and defy those bulldozers. All of them, not the longest lady, but one of the shortest. So that's my contribution to it, and it's lovely to recognize Frank and Eleanor Mikulski's family, because not only are they descendants of such wonderful people, they actually live in Eleanor and Frank's house on Ann Street, which I think is a wonderful part of history. So, thank you all.
Yeah, I was just sharing with PJ and wondering, I'm Nancy Conrad, and I didn't start as early as Barbara. Of course, I think I came around the same time as Laura and Tony, and the fight went on for quite a while. So I was just asking PJ if he remembered when it was over, and he couldn't. We don't know if it was ever announced that the fight was over, but I do remember. Do you too, Tony?
I can't remember the exact date, but we had a little ceremony in the square with Mayor Schaefer, and Charlie Duff was there with a hatchet. They buried the hatchet.
Oh.
And gave him the hatchet.
Well, probably the night before that, we were all celebrating in the bars because at that point, they were still trying to find a way to get through Fells Point without tearing our houses down. So they came up with a process called slurry wall construction. And we all, what in the world is that? Well, we can tunnel under, and we didn't like that idea. Oh, it'll be easy because nothing will happen. They're doing it in New York. It's a new process, and they go down in a hole and they pull things out so your house won't be disturbed. Well, we were all very skeptical. So about 30 of us were put on a bus by Interstate and taken to New York to see slurry wall construction. So we get there and everything was on strike. Nobody was doing anything with the process. So we all just paired off and start walking around, and we were in a destruction zone. Nothing was functioning. People had been moved out. Businesses that were there, people were still in there trying to clean up, but the floors had sunk in. An office business, I remember, had office equipment that was all down in a hole covered with this slurry stuff. It was a nightmare. So we all got back on the bus, and of course Dick Traynor from Interstate was on the bus, and we're all talking about, all of the horrible things we saw. And when we got to 95 at O'Donnell Street, Dick Traynor got up and went up to the bus driver. He says, "Tell me how you think this is going to work when all of the traffic is using this." He says, "Go slow around the bend and see if we have to make any changes so people will find it, they'll be able to get into Baltimore because they'll probably be coming, a lot of traffic will be coming through here." Well, when we got off that bus that night, we were all heading for the bars and celebrating. So that was when we knew that the highway was finished. But did they ever really tell us?
We actually agreed to an alternative that would never get built.
Mm-hmm.
There never was an actual declaration of stopping.
Yeah, it just.
But we figured out it was too expensive.
Well, there was also another way that it ended. And I went to the Baltimore City Council, but it never ended like a formal surrender, and Schaefer presented the plans like they did it, like the sword on the ship. But when I was in the City Council, I introduced the ordinance to repeal the path. And and we had hearings. Our most formal hearing, Jim, lasted 14 hours.
Wow.
Of people who wanted to testify. But it's because people had come from all over the city, and it was all the organizations that had submitted testimony. So then it came the vote, okay. But right before the vote, then it was Donald Schaefer's practice that if any city council person wanted to see them, with council going in at 5 o'clock on a Monday, you could go up and see him. Well, I didn't want to go up and see him, but I got this call. "Barbara, it's the mayor." You didn't say mayor, who? There was only one. And he said, "You're going to have this vote, right?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm going to roll you tonight." I said, "Well, no, I don't know that. I think I've got my votes. I can count to 19. And so he said, "No, I'm the mayor. You can only have one mayor at a time. You're not the mayor. I do admire that you're keeping your campaign promise. And I'll say this. There are those who say the waterfront is valuable. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. Embry says that there's potential. And after I beat you, if you want to come up and talk to me, I'll listen." So I walked into the city council, and I'm confident. But my colleagues are looking at their the vote is up that way. And then we had a wonderful Councilwoman Victorine Adams, one of our first African-American women in the council. And she'd been ill. They brought her in a wheelchair. And I said, I knew then that the light at the end of the tunnel was the train coming toward me. So when the vote was cast, I lost it 16-3. I voted to repeal the council president, Wally Orlinsky, and Arlen Specter. No, there were 4, and Bob Fitzpatrick. The rest deserted us, or they should say they were called to a higher power. When I called Schaefer, And we had a meeting with Embry, and I said, you know, you have to know what this fight is. It is not about a highway. It is about communities. These communities mean something. On both sides of the harbor and up Route 40, you have vibrant communities. And he said, I'm going to put the engineers to work. And then he and Wally Orlinsky had a quiet detente because they were arch foes. And the recommendation was the Fort McHenry Tunnel. So when you come in from 95, because it was where the federal money was to come, was not to connect 83 coming down, it was to connect 95 to go through the city. And they said, the tunnel under the water, but it is so expensive, there'll be bonds. But guess what? It did go under the water, and the Fort McHenry Tunnel was such a successful effort that the bonds were paid off in less than 7 years. All those bonds are paid for, but it was the Fort McHenry Tunnel that moved that. Because but 83 was supposed to end, and where the Rouse Pavilions and all was going to be a cloverleaf and connecting to go up through West Side. But there was never a formal surrender, and he would never let me have a formal vote.
Everyone for taking the time to attend this evening and attend our special moment in history with us tonight. And Senator Mikulski, thank you so very much for taking time in your busy schedule to be with us this evening and share our celebration.
Well, God bless everybody here. Everybody has made a major part in the history of Fells Point. And like I said, Fells Point today, Fells Point tomorrow, Fells Point forever.
Yes.
I'm glad I'm a long serving.
You got long steps.
Yes.